everyone. It's great to see so many of you here from all across the country. We're thrilled to see you. Thanks for being here at our first installment of our 2024 Partnering for Success webinar series. My name's Jennifer Thompson. I'm a principal consultant on our policy team here at Education Commission of the States. If you're joining us for the first time, Partnering for Success is designed to provide you, our commissioners, with opportunities for connection with peers and researchers and innovators who are providing solutions to some of today's most pressing education issues. We intend for you to leave these webinars filled with insight and inspiration and resources to support you as you address similar challenges in your states. I'm really pleased to bring us all together here around our CHAIRS initiative, which is focused on expanding education opportunities for justice-impacted individuals. I'm also very excited to introduce the newest member of the Education Commission of the States team, Jose Munoz, our new ECS president. He's been with us a little over a month, and he brings to ECS and to all of us 30 years of cross-sector experience leading initiatives that elevate policy to create meaningful change. So welcome, Jose. We're really excited to have you here to kick off our webinar.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the warm welcome. And hi, everybody. I'm excited to be part of my very first Partnering for Success presentation, especially to learn more about and to support Governor Kelly's initiative as Chair of Education Commissioners of the States, focused on the education of those who are justice impacted, which I've had spent some time of in my career. Let me just say a few words about ECS before we begin. As you all may know already, our purpose is really to enhance education for everyone. And we do this by working with elected and appointed state education leaders to make better informed policy. We believe in the power of learning from knowledge and experience, so we research and produce nonpartisan reports on trending education policy topics. Then we bring state elected and appointed education leaders and partners together, much like Partnering for Success, to learn from and collaborate with one another. Ultimately, we aim to create a learning society to enhance education for everyone. So thank you for joining us today to hear from Governor Kelly and our dynamic panel on justice-impacted learners, a very overlooked demographic. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our partners who help make events like this one possible. So if you go to that slide for our partners right here, for those of you that I've been lucky enough to gain time on your calendar, thank you for your time and your warm welcome. With each conversation, I was just impressed by the range of expertise you all provide within our own constituency of commissioners and of the work we can collaborate on. So I'm looking forward to that. So no one can deny that a lot of strides have been made in education, but there's still much to do. So having the support from our ECS team and from our commissioners and our partners, from each of you, it allows us to shoot for the highest goals for every student, every teacher, every classroom, and every state leader. It's my pleasure right now, who I just got a chance to meet in person, to introduce our Education Commission of the State's chair, the Honorable Laura Kelly, Governor of the state of Kansas. So Governor Kelly is a remarkable state leader known for advocating for children and families. She grew up in a career military family where she learned the importance of service, integrity, and accountability. As governor of Kansas, she has worked with both parties to balance the state budget, fully fund schools, and reform the child welfare system, just to name a few accomplishments. In her aim to make Kansas one of the best places to live, she has prioritized education and supporting early childhood development, and with her chair initiative, supporting justice-impacted learners. Without further ado, let's welcome Governor Laura Kelly.
Hello, thank you for joining the Partnering for Success webinar regarding my chair's initiative, Education Access for Justice-Impacted Individuals. This is the first virtual meeting on my initiative, and it will kick off a series of ECS opportunities on this topic. Those of you who joined us at the National Forum on Education Policy and the Winter Commissioners meeting last year heard me speak about my chair's initiative and about the work we've been doing in Kansas to expand access to correctional education. In Kansas, about 4,000 individuals are released from our state prisons back into the community in any given year. In fact, 98% of people currently incarcerated in Kansas will return to their communities sometime in their lives. We are working diligently to change the culture of Kansas prisons from one that's strictly punitive to one that fosters social and emotional development and workforce skill development. Aside from being the humane thing to do, the evidence is clear. Correctional education programs equip those re-entering society to become productive, contributing citizens, adding to our state's economy rather than being a burden. When I became governor, we established the Kansas Consortium of Corrections Higher Education, a partnership between 9 universities, community colleges, and tech schools, and 8 correctional facilities. Following that, we began participating in a U.S. Department of Education pilot program to reinstitute Pell-eligible programs in correctional facilities. Because of these efforts, Kansas has had tremendous success providing incarcerated individuals with high-quality educational opportunities, especially in post-secondary degree programs and workforce training. Over the last 4 years, we have made significant gains in enrollment and completion rates for these programs. In spite of the challenges that COVID brought to our correctional system, we've had remarkable success. Between 2001 and 2020, nearly 750 people completed an educational program while incarcerated. Since 2020, over 800 people have completed these programs. 480 incarcerated individuals are currently enrolled in programs to obtain their bachelor's or associate's degree, and an additional 238 are enrolled in career and technical education programs. And we aren't stopping there. This legislative session, we're working to expand these career and technical education and workforce development programs to our juvenile correctional facility in Topeka, so they can develop the skills that will allow them to obtain gainful employment and successfully transition to life beyond incarceration. Recently, we partnered with the Kansas Children's Discovery Center to allow incarcerated parents to spend time with their young children in the stimulating, normalizing environment of the museum or its mobile unit. Strengthening those family bonds will pay off in post-prison time. I look forward to working with you and the staff at ECS during my time as chair, as we look for ways to further enhance our state's correctional systems. Now it's my pleasure to turn it back over to Jose to introduce our panel of experts. They'll take a deeper dive into state policies that are working all across the country. Thank you all. Have a good seminar.
And thank you very much, Governor Kelly, for the warm welcome. The great work that you're doing as well. It's so important across the United States right now. On any given day, there's over 1.2 million people who are incarcerated. And what an astounding figure you have in Kansas, with over 95% soon to return. Across America, and why this should be important to all of us, that figure is roughly around 50% of people who are incarcerated will return back to the community. So you're taking folks who may have lost hope and giving them hope, folks who may have been convicted of a crime and making them contributors in the community. So we are pleased to support you, Governor Kelly, and her initiative as chair of ECS to help state policymakers really identify policy levers that we can use to increase access to post-secondary education in carceral settings. Some of the things that strategies we'll explore over time is throughout our work is examining governance structures, just to find better ways to communicate and collaborate to serve people who are justice involved. We want to look at expanding access to state financial aid to fill financial gaps where Pell Grants don't cover the full cost of attendance. And we're looking at providing students support in areas such as accessing technology and creating learning spaces for them and completing the FAFSA, among other things as well. So I want to thank you again, Governor Kelly. I want to thank all you all again for being here. I'm looking forward to working with each of you, and also welcome a chance to meet you and learn more about your work in your states as well. I'm going to add my calendar link into the chat. If you'd like to schedule a 30-minute meeting with me, please open up that link and do so. But right now, it is my pleasure to turn it back over to Jennifer Thompson to start today's panel conversation. So thank you all, and thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Governor Kelly. Before we begin, I do want to let you all know that we are going to have some time at the end of the panel discussion for Q&A. So please do use the Q&A function here in Zoom to add your questions. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Rebecca Villarreal, the Senior Director of the Center for Justice and Economic Advancement at Jobs for the Future. We have a really wonderful panel and a lot of ground to cover. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it right over to Rebecca, and she's going to get the conversation started. Rebecca?
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Really appreciate the opportunity to moderate this important conversation. JFF Center for Justice and Economic Advancement launched about 2 years ago to really be an expression of Jobs for the Future's vision around economic opportunity for all, and really focus that energy and attention on folks that are currently informally incarcerated, folks with conviction histories. How do we make sure that there are talent development opportunities, there are more employers that are thinking about fair chance hiring and thinking about the policy landscape that needs to be present in order to really center economic opportunity and move away from recidivism as one of the key outcomes of this work, and really thinking about economic opportunity and mobility for folks with records. So really excited to be here and to have this important conversation. As the governor mentioned, there's a lot of great work happening across the country that really stands to benefit from policy interventions to better understand outcomes, to scale proven practices and transform systems to expand educational access for individuals currently and formerly incarcerated. There's also tremendous opportunities to maximize or leverage existing policies. Jose mentioned Pell Grant restoration. There's a moment in time right now with the reinstatement of eligibility for learners that are currently incarcerated with this federal funding to be able to spark new conversations, tremendous opportunities for student-centric change. Some of the questions that we'll explore today and that others in the field, many of us connecting today, are grappling with include: how are we thinking about college preparation and readiness for this particular learner population? How do students have access to information about academic and career pathways to really make an informed choice about which program to pursue? Is there a choice to be made? Ideally, that there are multiple academic pathways available in the facilities where individuals are residing, or maybe there's a process within that Department of Corrections to transfer students to facilities based on educational and career interests. We're exploring how our students provided opportunities to build digital literacy in our tremendously connected and technologically driven world. And we also know from tremendous research across the field of higher ed, the importance of high impact practices. How are we bringing internships, research, experiential learning opportunities to these students? And how are we preparing our campuses, our employer partners, and our communities to fully support continuing education and access to quality jobs aligned with the skills, talent, and aspirations as these learners come home? I could spend a whole bunch of time talking about some of those other areas, but I'm so thrilled to be joined by 3 phenomenal people who are helping lead the way. And by way of introduction, I'm going to have each of them answer a question to frame up their experience and interest in this space, as well as do a brief introduction. So first, I'm going to invite Chris to do an introduction. And Chris, by way of after you've done your introduction, the governor shared some of the great work that's underway in Kansas in her opening remarks. And I know you want to revisit some of those great outcomes the governor previewed for those of us that are visual learners. But also, can you share from your vantage point in the Department of Corrections, who are some of your partners, your critical stakeholders that are really helping expand educational access for learners that are currently incarcerated, and what's been driving your momentum in Kansas?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And I'd like to thank the Jose and the Education Commission of the States for inviting me to share what we've been doing in Kansas. You heard Governor Kelly talk a little bit about some of the successes that we've had, some of the statistics. I think what's really important to understand first and foremost about corrections is we exist to enhance public safety and to decrease the number of victims. So when we think about how many people are going to return to our community, we really need to be cognizant of what we're doing in that time that they're with us. And what she didn't share is, 66% of the people that come to one of our correctional facilities, one of the 8 adult or the juvenile facility, 66% of them are going to return to their community in less than 5 years. So we have this window of time with individuals to provide those opportunities so they can reenter society successfully. And what we do know is that education and employment are massive factors in making sure that they don't come back to us. So 65% of people are more likely to be employed with a life-sustaining wage, 20% if you get a college course. If you hold an industry job while you're incarcerated, you 25% more likely to go and be employed in a life-sustaining wage. Every single one of these individuals, they are all a third less likely to return to prison. So when we think about what we are tasked with, partnerships are key. So Governor Kelly mentioned the Kansas Consortium for Corrections Higher Education. And I will say first and foremost, that was probably the most important partnership that we could have. It consists of 9 college partners, all of whom were part of the Second Chance Pell Initiative. So they've been in our facilities for the past 3 years, providing post-secondary education, either in the form of a Pell-eligible career and technical education certificate, or in the form of an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. So those partnerships obviously are very important. But I do want to touch on just a little bit the state agency partnerships. We've got a great partnership with the Department of Commerce here in Kansas. They provide all of our workforce development initiatives. We have a partnership with the Kansas Board of Regents. They oversee all adult and post-secondary education. And then the employers. We have to have that relationship with the employers out there, because if we are truly going to do very purposeful education, we need to make sure that we're doing it with the end goal in mind, which of course is having individuals be employed with a life-sustaining wage.
Thanks so much, Chris. And I think this thread of conversation is going to be really clear for today's conversation around the connection to employment, that education and workforce training be aligned to post-release outcomes and making sure that folks have access to quality jobs. That I know this is something that the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison is really deeply committed to. And for folks that might be less familiar with the Alliance, we really think about it as being the heart center of the field of higher education in prison. So can you share a little bit more about your organization and how the Alliance is supporting the field and expanding educational access for learners that are currently incarcerated, with your particular attention placed on quality and equity?
Yes, thanks, Rebecca, and I'm happy to be here with everyone today. And I just want to say thanks to ECS for centering this work and doing your best to advance these efforts for the field and for incarcerated learners. So our work is, we are a national nonprofit, and we focus solely on the community building aspect of keeping this field kind of in a central place, or in a place where there can be a sense of community. A lot of this work is very isolated. People are working in places with little resources and sometimes out of the corner of their department. And so they don't have time to build community, build relationships, share information, share resources and things of that nature. So we've taken on that role to be a place where you can get as many resources as you need to understand the scope of this work, whether you're a practitioner or working on reentry, or whether you're a former student or anything in between. So couple things that we do here. We have a couple big projects that provide these resources and support to the field. One of them being the National Directory, which compiles data from higher ed and prison programs across the U.S. Right now, it's self-reported, but there are about 405 higher education and prison programs across the U.S. being ran through 540 academic institutions. But again, this is self-reported, so there's estimates that there's around 700 higher education and prison programs across the US. So that's just to give you a scope of how big this field is and how much work is actually being done. So that's one piece of our work, the National Directory. It just kind of shows you an interactive map of where programs are, what type of offerings they have, associates, bachelor's, certifications, and things of this nature. So that's one pretty valuable resource, and we see it as serving not just the field, but the general public to be able to look at the field and understand the vastness and the depth and breadth of work that's happening in this space. So it also was a resource that gave the field a mirror to see itself. So we actually know how big it is, again, because it's relatively isolating and it's hard to know, who all is out there doing it. On that note, we also host an annual conference. This past year, it was in Atlanta. We had around 850 people in attendance. And this was a compilation of practitioners, folks from corrections, formerly incarcerated students, and all kinds of stakeholders, reentry as well. So that's another project that we do to kind of build community. One of the most recent resources that we've developed is the RCHEP, which you'll see on the screen. It's the Resource Community for Higher Education in Prison, which is an interactive platform where there's just a repository of resources, over 400. We launched it in November, but it'll be constantly updated with new resources, news, publications, templates for MOUs, staff handbooks, all sorts of stuff that would support how to do this work well. And it also gives the opportunity to connect with other people in the field on similar issues to advance the work. A couple other things that we have going. We have a journal on higher education in prison that is the only peer-reviewed journal for the field, and that is just a compilation of texts and writings and research from people who are currently incarcerated, as well as formerly incarcerated folks, as well as practitioners. So in a nutshell, that's a bit about what we do. I'll dip into education in action, which is our big program area that we're really excited about, but I can pause and share that later.
Thanks, Ben. Would definitely encourage folks to check out RCHEP in particular and add your resources, sign up. It's a place where really meant to be interactive and folks flagging questions and sharing knowledge through that platform. Ben, I'd love to go ahead and invite you to share a little bit about education in action. I think it's a nice thread from Chris's remarks. So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit more about that effort?
Yeah, thanks. I'll share a bit and then I'll pass it to Victoria. So Education in Action is a program area of ours where we focus on connecting and bridging the gap between the obtainment of education and connecting it to employment and career pathways during incarceration. So, for the longest while, educational and degree obtainment has been kind of the terminal success metric for the space, without the idea or thought of connecting that education to employment, or even using part of the education curriculum, internships, things of this nature, as an element that should be included in higher education in prison. And historically, it hasn't really been available due to not just being incarcerated, but also because of the lack of technology in these spaces. And so as a result of COVID, we saw not only remote work become a widely accepted norm, but also technology inside of prison spaces being expanded rapidly. And so with that, I saw this as an opportunity to really capitalize on and say, hey, we have technology, we have remote work, we have Pell reinstatement. We know that part of what makes education quality are these high impact learning practices that allow somebody to use their education in a practical setting. And so that's kind of where this project emerged from. One of the biggest goals with this is that we seek to pay people during incarceration too for their internships, because we know access to finances during incarceration is slim. And we also know that people will be released. So, we think about this. What would it mean for somebody to be released from incarceration with $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to have some autonomy over their own reentry, to pay for their own housing, to pay for their own vehicle, pay for their own food, things of this nature, which in turn could reduce the burden that's put on reentry organizations, nonprofits, social services, human services, to have to provide all of these services when a person during incarceration, after spending all this time could come home with some money to not, reinforce that narrative of government dependency that gets thrown around a lot. And so, we know that people after doing 10, 15 years are still released from prison with $50, $100, and they're tasked with navigating the reentry process. So we find education in action at the intersection of employment and education, and it sits really well. And so we're looking to scale this stuff nationally and create more opportunities for people to work during incarceration. So there's a better return on investment for the education, because if somebody's receiving education during incarceration, and they complete their bachelor's and their master's, and they still have 10 years left, what's the return on investment? There's the education sitting there and they're not able to use it. So again, with the remote work becoming the norm and technology expanding into the prisons, this is an area that we're deeply committed to exploring and making possible. So I can pass it to Victoria, who is a fellow with us, and she is on a year-long fellowship with us. And we are paying Victoria $25 an hour. And so anyways, I will pause there and pass it to Victoria. I get really excited about this stuff because I see the potential and the possibility and the reality that it's coming to pass. So without any further comments, I will pass it to you, Victoria.
Thanks so much, Ved. And I'm just so grateful to be here with everyone today and to talk about my experiences with education in action and with work learning opportunities. I am currently a bachelor's student with the University of Maine at Augusta in an interdisciplinary degree for justice studies and transformative systems planning with a minor in psychology. Wow, that's a mouthful. But never did I think, when I had first advocated to be able to access education as someone with an extended sentence, that I would be able to work remotely with a national organization like the Alliance from inside prison walls. I have done things I couldn't have dreamed of and that I never would have suspected of myself. And it has helped me to build confidence in my ability to relate to people in what I have to offer, and knowing that that's something of value, that my efforts have the ability to shift paradigms, to change narratives, that I have the ability to be not only the example of someone who made a mistake, who has committed harm to society and to myself and to my community and to others, but someone who has the ability to heal that and to make gestures of improvement that not only help me recover from my own personal trauma, but from our collective traumas, and to be able to speak on behalf of that for others who haven't seen the potential that these mechanisms have to offer. So for me, I know that it can be a disconnected experience, especially if you have a disproportionate sentence to reentry transition. So having that background of being institutionalized and, say, limited opportunities to be able to have that reintegrative experience with the community, whether it be through work or anything else, you're at a disadvantage. You can't save as much money as you might need to be able to support yourself, to pay bills, to be able to acquire insurance, or any of your basic needs, really. And having an opportunity like this has allowed me to save. No, I think I tipped over $10,000 in my bank account recently, partially owing to the money that I make working with the Alliance, being able to exercise the skills that otherwise, excuse me, sorry, we have a PA in here. But we work with what we got, and it's progress, not perfection. This helps us to stay adaptable, and to be able to do this really changes the culture of being inside. Sometimes the system is trying so hard to offer something and to be efficient, to cover the bases, that it lacks the synergy that it needs to actually be as effective as it would like to. So leaving prison, even if you were striving for your college degree, sometimes you land in a false dichotomy where you might have to go into a job transitionally to be able to leave with money in your pocket. And those are sort of these high turnover, unskilled service work positions, which are very necessary. We all know, as Ved mentioned in COVID, there was high turnover, and these are essential workers. But unfortunately, you don't often get the opportunity to advance. There's no socioeconomic mobility, and you're living hand to mouth for the rest of your life. And if you have to choose between that and, a college educated position that allows you to put that knowledge to work, then often you'll choose instant gratification instead of making an investment in yourself that's going to help you rise above the adversity that you faced your entire life. So I love being able to access this opportunity for myself and to speak for the benefits for others, and hopefully being able to be involved in expanding these opportunities so that people can go down that path, that there's opportunities for career development, and work begets work, opportunity begets opportunity. So the more people that you're able to professionally network with, work with, to be able to gain experience in different fields, the more versatile you are, the more you have marketable skills to be able to advance throughout your career path, and you're looking at something that's sustainable.
Thanks, Victoria. Building that social network, that social capital is so valuable, and really applaud the Alliance and Education in Action in really centering building that social capital and helping folks be exposed to so many different types of academic and career pathways. So we've had a chance to hear a little bit more about the organizations that each of you represent, the experiences that each of you as leaders are bringing to today's conversation. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to transition to talking about policy levers. And I have a couple of questions that I'll ask each of you to address. And Victoria, you're up first for this first one. So from your vantage point, what are the biggest policy opportunities to expanding educational access for learners that are currently incarcerated? And we'll start with Victoria. Ved, you're on deck, and then we'll round this question out with Chris.
I think you're muted, Victoria.
Thank you. I was double muted. I love this question. I'm a bit of a policy geek, so I love figuring out what we could do to improve our written systems and practices to actually be transformational rather than prohibitive. So I think as far as policy goes, we really should have explicitly established mechanisms in policy that open up our conception of what reentry is. Currently, so many programs are limited by this finite window of time that actually is disadvantageous to incarcerated people. A lot of times it's defined as being within 90 days of your release date, but that's very disorienting. Things happen in a flash, and there's so much anxiety that comes with that transitional reality. You may not be grounded enough to be able to seek the opportunities that are going to mean the most to you in that time frame. There's so much emotional fallout at that point, just trying to process the fact that you're going back into the world. So I really think having specific policy mechanisms to designate that reentry begins at intake, and figuring out what educational assessments are necessary. The New England Board for Higher Education on the Futures of Higher Education in Prison, there was a special commission for that, authored a wonderful report that talked about how to be able to integrate these mechanisms that we're using right now, the introduction of technology into facilities to support academic achievement, to be able to figure out what assessments are necessary to know what support someone will need, whether or not academic achievement is correct for them or a vocational training would be more appropriate and more within their wheelhouse of interest. I think that policies that are geared towards student support and equity, so also including criminal backgrounds into the definition of discrimination, as long as it doesn't put anyone at risk, I think that policy and practice could best be aligned so that people who do have carceral experience are not disadvantaged and discriminated against in perpetuity.
Lots of head nods on those, Victoria. Ved, what about you?
Where to start? I think Pell is here. Pell has been reinstated. It's estimated that around 760,000 people are eligible for Pell. And so I think one thing with that should be considered is that not everybody who's eligible for Pell is college ready. And the fact that lots of people will go ahead and start trying to enroll people to get Pell dollars or just to get somebody into college real quick and hit numbers, I think is something that should be really evaluated. And so with that, I think, you know, educational assessment and placement should be something that really gets taken into consideration, because I think there's a narrow stream of information for incarcerated learners to understand what quality education is. And anything that may be pitched to them might seem great, and it might not necessarily be quality. And we really we want people to continue education once they're released if they haven't finished, and if the education they're receiving on the inside doesn't even come close to what they're going to experience on the outside, that's an issue. So I think incarcerated learners, I think there should be some policy around making sure that incarcerated learners understand not only their Pell eligibility, but what makes a program quality. And just because something's accredited doesn't mean it's quality either. So, you know, that's one piece I would say around policy. The other one, I have a list of them, but I'll just touch on one other one, which is access to technology. And with that, you know, people who are incarcerated, we will need access to internet, and trying to look at everything manually through a book while other people are getting education with access to a wide variety of information at any given time creates a disparity in the type of education and the quality of education that somebody can get, because you have a narrow scope of resources versus somebody else being able to do the same curriculum with the entire internet available to them. So reviewing technology, reviewing tech policies that may be excessive or restrictive. I think hiring a DOC IT tech team or person to manage things to ensure that safety and security is still preserved would be critical. And then again, I would review the policies around employment during incarceration. I think you can incentivize education by demonstrating the fact that if you go through education, there is a chance that you might even be able to do an internship, but even further than that, become employed during incarceration. That type of incentive will get people in classrooms faster than anything else that you can preach to anybody. And so I think with that and relate with that piece, yeah, I think work, learning opportunities and employment during incarceration and opportunities to apply education in a work setting, even if that's remote, those are policies that should be reviewed and assessed. We're working on a project now to understand the laws and legislation and policies in each state that may restrict this type of setup. But those are just a couple of big ones that come to mind for me. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thanks, Ben. Chris, round us out.
Well, everything that they just mentioned, you know, Victoria said reentry starts at intake, and that it absolutely does. There are so many things that we need to be doing when that person comes into our facility. You know, Ved's talked about incentivizing education and incentivizing it with something that makes sense, which is employment. So I think I'll just add to that whole conversation. I think that policy that is willing to take risks and be innovative is really necessary in this space. You know, getting Wi-Fi to residents seems really far-fetched, but we've done it in Kansas and it's okay, right? We are trying out these little things step by step. I think one of the biggest things that Governor Kelly has put forth this year is in her budget recommendation. She put $20 million in there for the Department of Corrections to help kickstart our fundraising campaign for a career campus. So when we think about incentivizing these things, when we think about purposeful education and employment pathways, having the support at that level and also having legislators who are on board with it from both sides of the aisle. It's just important that we just continue to engage in these conversations, think really innovatively, and be willing to take some risks. It's ironic, my title includes risk reduction, but be willing to take some risks in thinking bigger, and then figuring out those mechanisms to incentivize, to get technology in there, and then everything that Victoria said. We gotta start. We gotta be really, really purposeful about it.
Thank you for really encouraging us, Chris, to think about thinking big, to be thinking about taking risk. And I think what I would add to this particular question is then being able to provide the resources to be able to study those pilots or study the implementation so that we do have a growing evidence base around what's working or maybe where we're hitting barriers. So not only those investments related to the implementation, but then are we also investing resources to be able to have additional research and evaluation of this work? You know, so many groundbreaking things are happening, and unfortunately, some of them get dismissed because we don't have some of that data to go alongside the anecdotes, the great individual stories that are tremendously powerful. But how can we also have that both qualitative and quantitative data? So audience members, I have one more question and then we'll open the floor. So we'll go back through. Chris, you'll kick us off. Which stakeholders need to be at the table when we're thinking about some of these policy changes? Would love to hear for your take around who has to be part of these conversations.
You know, we exist for public safety. I think we have a lot of stakeholders that need to come to the table. But the one thing I do want to kind of put out there that I haven't said is we got to get the families' voices, and then we need all the Victorias. I need that voice front and center as we push forward these initiatives. It does us no good to put in place all of these innovations and all of these educational and employment opportunities if it's not going to make sense for the people who it's going to exist for, right? So I think that those are the major stakeholders, you know, not forgetting our education partners that we've worked with side by side. But definitely, I want to stress the importance of the families and then the voices of those individuals who are incarcerated in our facilities.
Ed, which stakeholders have to be at the table when we're thinking about policy changes?
Yeah, I would say as many government folks who are, you know, I would say there's a piece that needs to be preserved around data and data sharing. And that's across multiple government agencies that manage different elements of the same data. And I think understanding that continuum and having those people in the same room would make for a good base or foundation of what this work looks like in practice, so you can actually make a stronger policy argument. So, you know, those types of stakeholders, whether that's commerce, human services, Department of Labor, those folks definitely need to be at the table. DOC, I would also say reentry folks, community-based organizations, academic institutions, academic leadership. So presidents of schools, provosts, deans, those type of people need to be at the table. So there's institutional buy-in. So that pathway to campus is actually a possible one, because many higher ed and prison programs, believe it or not, have policies on their campus that restrict that same student from coming to that campus upon release. So, you know, I think that's a few folks that should be at the table. And then I'll say one that's probably not the most popular, and I haven't really received any backlash from it, but I think in terms of just morally, but also strategically, victims and survivors of crime, or however we want to term it, they need to be at the table. Those voices are important, they're valuable, and there's a lot of healing that comes from that community when they can see that people are undergoing changes in their lives. And so I think that population is one that should be really given attention to and mobilized. I've seen a sentence go from 5 years to 30 years, and I've seen a sentence go from 30 years to 5 years based on victims' testimonies. So those are powerful voices that can shape policy as well. And so I would encourage everybody to think about how to care for that population as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Ved. Victoria.
Had to take off my mute safety here. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Chris, for being so complimentary. I really admire your words, and I'm still feeling quite swayed by them because it's so important. You said something I want to highlight very quickly, talking about almost how counterintuitive it is to take a risk. But I think we often forget, particularly in dealing with such security-oriented systems, that a calculated risk is often it's often the forerunner to a great reward, you know, and being able to adequately plan and be mindful and account for these things is worth the dividends that we stand to reap from that and gain from it. And if we're unwilling to take a chance, we absolutely know that nothing will change for the better. So if what we have now isn't working, maybe exactly what we need is just a little bit of risk. So thank you so much for saying that. I'm going to take that with me today. And as for stakeholders, nihil de nobis sine nobis, huh? Nothing about us without us. Who is more capable of informing the changes in the systems, knowing both sides? You know, if you need cybersecurity, someone who has effectively hacked a system can tell you exactly where your holes are, right? They can be your best asset. So someone who has been in the justice system and is impacted, is dealing with trying to, you know, access professional development opportunities and education, knows what we need, knows what barriers we're going to run into, can best inform the solutions to be able to adequately address those, but can also tell you what you're going to need to look for to make sure that it's safe for everyone involved and sustainable and successful. They're going to be honest with you as long as you build that trust with them. So I think that it's really important to build equitable partnerships where everyone who is affected is going to have a seat at the table, including universities, making sure that they're not kind of siloed as administrators who are offering a remote program or an in-person program in a classroom in a prison, and that they're prison students. They're not actually university students who are full members of that community. I think making sure that their practices align with non-discrimination policies and second chances and stated values of prison education partnerships is key in making sure that we are in our authenticity, that we're sending genuine messages of success and hope, and that we're actually allowing people to embrace everything that they're working for and to be rewarded by that when they have, you know, attained a certain level. So I think that that's very important.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Jennifer, I turn the floor to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're so appreciative to have all of your wise words and to hear your stories. Thank you. We do have a question here. As we work to put together a proposal to hire currently incarcerated students as tutors and peer support specialists, can you recommend resources, best practices, and/or sample agreements or models for such an endeavor? That's a wonderful question. Who would like to take that one?
I really want to just jump ahead and nominate Victoria because I think she's had some very good experience in leading these efforts in the facility that she's at and in the state that she's at. Victoria, sorry for calling you out, but I know that this is a passion of yours that we've spoke extensively about.
Of course it is. Actually, I think I said something about connecting education and work learning opportunities in our initial interview when we first met. So I think that, let's see this question as we work to put together. So I know that a couple of organizations right now that work in justice circles and advocacy and academic circles are partnering and forming these multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary teams to come up with best practice guides for how to hire policy consultants and peer specialists, all kinds of specialties in different fields to be able to have people working directly with other justice impacted folks, and what best practices models would be appropriate for that. This is still a point of research, but I have found that CEPP and the Opportunity Scholars, another organization that I work with, are doing wonderful work with that. And Jobs for the Future does so much work in policy change and being able to organize equitable systems and advocate for those necessary changes. The Alliance is constantly posting things on progressive systems and different organizations that are innovating our way along these pathways to try to figure out how we can have the support that students need for successful outcomes, to make sure that they're not isolated and they're not being left to their own devices and it's a sink or swim situation, you know. I also really appreciate what they're doing right now in California with, I believe it's Rise Up, to make sure that formerly incarcerated students actually have pathways to campus where they're supported, where they're embraced, and where they have these communities of care around them so that they have the transitional experience that's necessary to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks, that they don't abandon all of their hard work, and that they have people who understand their experiences in order to help them rise above some adversity that they might face, because unfortunately, not everybody sees this vision so clearly yet, but I am very excited in the efforts that we're all making to show them.
I can also chime in and say we're developing a resource for education in action that will outline some best practices for people who are looking to employ people during incarceration, talking about the carceral space, the carceral setting, all the things to take into consideration. So that's already underway, and we've been working on that for a couple of months. But it will have best practices for employees, employers, and then some things of consideration for departments of corrections as they traverse this kind of new land. But feel free to reach out to us. I'm very accessible, and I can work with you around best practices and things to consider when hiring somebody during incarceration.
And I would just add another plug for RCHEP as a platform to pose these types of questions, to network with others that have navigated those hiring processes. I think having really open and early conversations with your Department of Corrections staff and partners to understand what's possible. I think that's one of the first places to go and first stakeholder to engage. And then understanding what the university or college policy might look like when it comes to having currently incarcerated tutors or academic advisors or other types of roles. Those are a couple of key stakeholders that I would encourage early conversations with.
Great, thank you. I think let's try to squeeze in one more question, because we have a good one here from a teaching artist who's taught at the Department of Corrections in Georgia, interested in where arts and humanities intersect in education. The classes this person taught weren't necessarily to offer tools for future employment, but rather tools to perhaps manage mental health. Briefly, do any of you have anything to say to that?
I mean, I can take a shot at it. I know that there's always been this ongoing discussion around the humanities and how it may or may not translate to workforce and things of this nature. I think the humanities serve an amazing purpose to as a foundation, I think, to do any work, whether that's in STEM or any other field, as well as humanities work. I will speak to this piece around art for mental health, and I think, the humanities serve a very beautiful tool for mental health. I would say, also that education, I'll frame this in this space, education for the longest while in many ways has been seen as this tool to come in and save souls and save lives and transform the minds of beasts or something like this, right? Education. So I will say this, that the minds many times don't necessarily need to be transformed. The conditions that these people came from are the things that need to be transformed, and the conditions that these people are in are the things that need to be transformed. I do think education can serve as a transformational lever, but I think there are limitations around how education should be pitched in these spaces. And that's just me speaking candidly, because I think a lot of times people came in there wanting to save everybody, and it's like, look, if I was making $100,000 a year, I probably wouldn't have broken into a house or stolen this food from a Walmart or whatever else, right? Like, so those conditions are the things that need to be transformed rather than minds, although I think all of us could benefit from mind transformation and good mental health. But to answer the question, I do think, humanities is a critical role in serving many topics, including mental health. So that's just my 2 cents.
Victoria, you might be double muted.
You every time, still learning. I'd just like to quickly add to that that I am a huge believer in the transformative capacity of art to be able to help us have healing experiences and breakthroughs, but also in the way that art connects to learning experiences in ways that aren't always obvious. So sometimes this is the introduction of soft skills that may not seem applicable in a professional setting. And then later you find out maybe there's a graphic design opportunity, or maybe there's an illustration opportunity for the comms department and they need a logo, and you're a little creative and you really had a great time indulging in that class, and it seemed like it might not have been a professional skill set or an avenue that you might take forward with you, but it's something that is transferable and it's something that can always be used. But there always is merit in having these healing classes that do stabilize mental health and that do help people to connect their experiences with something that's holistic. So I think that that's very valuable, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for the great questions, and thank you to our audience for participating today and our wonderful panel. I think I said at the beginning, we want people to leave inspired, and I'm guessing a lot of people are leaving inspired. So thank you. Thank you very much. So to our audience, remember that Education Commission of the States is here to support you in your work. And we are really proud to provide support that benefits students, all students working with and across states to ensure that they all have access to a quality education. So if you do have questions about today's session, please reach out to me. My contact information is there in the chat. We did record today's session, and we will share a link to the recording in a post-event email, so be on the lookout for that. We hope that you can all join us for our Partnering for Success webinar next month, which will be a staff-led presentation on education trends that we've been observing in Governor's State of the State addresses. That webinar is on March 15th at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. And the registration link will be in the chat there, and we'll also have that registration meeting or registration link in the post-meeting email you'll be receiving. So again, I would just like to thank our wonderful panel. Thank you so much for your thought-provoking remarks. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And I hope that you all enjoy your afternoon. Thank you so much.